session will give you something to take away and learn from to work on. To just give you an idea of what the schedule is, so it's relatively loose, especially with a bigger group. Obviously it's difficult to pin it down to the minute, and there are going to be a lot of questions, I'm sure, from everybody as we go along. So just in terms of the structure, we're going to start off with a sort of brief introduction, and then the majority of the session is actually going to be here on the block. We're going to talk, we'll probably take it for most of the time just to chat and a bit of the instruction and the theory behind things. And then we'll jump on the water to do some drills. The idea is that this is not a training session, it's more of a sort of education session and an opportunity to challenge and explore what has often been handed down as accepted norms, which through my own journey I've discovered is not really applicable to everyone. So what I'll ask is that, like, we'll go through as we go through, if you have questions, is to shout. So basically by the time we get onto the water, everybody is on the same level in terms of being set up correctly and comfortable and ready to paddle. So I'll start off with just introducing myself. Again, just turned 40, and it feels like I'm still 22. And so I started paddling in around 98, 99, and obviously, coming out here to a place like this today, this is as far from where I started paddling as imaginable. Everything from the environment, the people that are paddling, the craft, everything is completely different. And I've been lucky enough to kind of watch things evolve and figure out a lot of these things for myself. Obviously, we all kind of start off being told how to do things in a particular way. We don't necessarily always question them, and we just kind of toe the line and then later on figure it out for ourselves. So the idea of my session has always been to sort of encourage you to challenge a lot of that information and try and figure out why, when you're doing something that you were told to do right off the bat, isn't giving you the same results as what it's giving the guy next to you. So I started paddling through surf life saving, so in 20-foot boats designed to go in and out of the waves. No adjustable foot pedals or anything like that. Nothing about safety in terms of life jackets and things like that. Obviously we were lifeguards, so that didn't help us. But then in terms of boat setup, obviously there was very little variability. Took a boat, took half the tape measure, okay, right, that's your boat. Might not fit, but that's the one you got. Paddles, it was like, like this, put your hand there, fits there, okay, cool, that's long enough for you. It wasn't an adjustable paddle, so if it wasn't perfect, that's what it was. It was at a 60-degree right angle feather. Coming from South Africa, that 60 degrees, for anyone knows, could be 90 degrees. It's, the way it was put up, nobody knows really. And that was it, and that's how we paddled and we learned, and some guys got it straight away and some didn't. Pretty soon after starting, I got involved in doing longer distance races. Got one called the Cape Point Challenge, which is a sort of 50k event which I would compare to something like the Blackburn. It's the sort of iconic event around our region. And I first did that at 16, and in those days it was only run every second year. Yeah, it was quite a thing for a 15, 16-year-old kid to paddle 56 k's in those days in 30 knots of wind. So it remains like a real challenge, and it's a race that's a lot of landing in South Africa and Capetown in particular. And yeah, so fast forward to basically 10 years ago, I had kind of paddled, and like I at one point had stopped altogether. Like I had a leg injury that stopped me doing much, had kids, work, and I just kind of drifted away from paddling. And then fast forward to sort of 2015, I got stuck in again, and I really wanted to race again. But I'd missed out on basically 5 years of training that my colleagues and my peers had been through, and they'd kind of progressed and I hadn't really. And at that point I'd still, in my mind, my heyday was sort of 7 years before that. So to get to any kind of level there would be almost impossible. But I kind of got stuck into paddling and put my head down and went for it. And a lot of what got me back in shape was having to train on my own, to figure out a lot of these things for myself. I sort of drew up programs and had enough of a history and knowledge on how to get things done from a planning point of view. But the big thing for me was now a technique and theoretical standpoint. And I started challenging a lot of the things that had been told to me before, and that was everything from boat setup to paddle setup, and then working it down to the actual stroke, and started looking at different ways to explore that. And between consulting with other people, listening to podcasts, reading things, I was like constantly looking at different ways to do things. And I saw the benefits of that kind of within sort of 9 months. I got like really fit, and I was actually got to a point where I had now surpassed what I'd previously considered to be peak in terms of performance. We have a couple of one particular downwind paddle which you may have heard of is the Miller's Run, and that was always it's a sort of 12k downwind run, which Joel will tell you it's a pretty cool run. But they're sort of gold standards in terms of performance and times and splits and things like that. And as soon as I got to the point where I was reaching times that I was doing before, I knew that I was onto something good in terms of my training approach. Still doing most of it on my own, specifically the sort of technique side of things. So then I met with Dave like late 2016, early 2017, and they welcomed me to the team, and I was able to do a bunch of races and a bunch of traveling. I've come out this way a couple of times before. I was obviously super lucky to live a lifestyle where work and paddling kind of allowed for these things to happen. But effectively, I was kind of like a lot of the guys who were racing at the time, managing our own sort of schedules and sort of things around work and travel and family and everything else, which kind of further enforced the fact that I needed to be pretty deliberate about technique and methods rather than just going out and paddling. And that, along with that came opportunities to coach and both kids and then also do clinics like this. So I've developed a sort of lesson or session, if you will, where you start breaking down the different aspects of paddling, from boat setup and paddle setup to the stroke itself. The ultimate goal here is to find habits and sort of triggers to help you develop a sense of efficiency and effectively being able to paddle in any conditions for as long as you are physically capable of, without sacrificing technique along the way. Before we start getting into the lesson itself, has anybody got any questions now? Cool. So the first thing that we look up is the boat setup. So again, this is where the challenging of theories comes into play. I'm almost certain that everybody here at some point has been told that when they're selecting leg length and things like that, you get in the boat and you need to be able to put your fist under your knee, right? That's how you know that the leg length is correct. So we get in the boat and we have 10 people here with 10 different boats, with 10 different variations of buckets. We've all got different body types. Some of you've got legs like Joel, short, thick. Some of your legs like me, long and skinny. So just by virtue of the fact that you've got different body, that theory of putting a fist under your knee isn't going to work. And that's where it all starts. Same thing with the paddle angle. You can have two guys, same height, different length torsos, different length legs, different length arms. So we could be standing next to each other, we would get into a boat, and I'll more than likely be a foot shorter than most guys my height when I'm sitting in the boat. Just because I've got a short torso, long legs, so my height's all in my legs. So how can we have the same paddle setup if we've got completely different anatomy? So the first thing that we look at is why we need to be set up in the boat the way that we need to be set up. The first thing that we do is we kind of look at another myth, which says that when we put the paddle in the water, we're then pulling it. Right? In fact, what's happening is that we're putting the paddle in the water. The paddle stays in the same place, and we're pushing ourselves past that point. So, in order to do that, there needs to be resistance, right? So there's two ends of resistance. One is the blade in the water, which has got to be correct, and the other is your body in the boat. If there's any play between your body and the boat, as soon as you start putting pressure on that paddle, you're going to move in the boat and you've lost energy without gaining any water. So setup in the boat is important, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. And then the next is the paddle setup. So the length is one thing and the angle is the other. And another one which is often overlooked is your hand positioning on the blade. So another common one is you've got to pick up the paddle and your hands have got to be at 90 degrees, and you have to have 25 mil of space between the edge of your paddle and the end of your knuckle, and that's the right length. That doesn't account for wide hands or different styles of paddles or anything like that. Also seen sort of paddle calculators, paddle length calculators, which are pretty good for like a population level rough guide. So first time getting into the boat, it's a good way to kind of learn. I suppose it's the same as first time you get on a bicycle, you can get away with riding it with your saddle at a certain height, but as you become better on a bike and you need to be more efficient, you need to kind of play around with that saddle height to make sure that you're getting a good stroke in. So the paddle thing as well is something that there is no one size fits all here. This is something that I spend a lot of time with refining, and it has changed over the years and kind of changes according to fitness and strength, time of year, the water conditions, wind especially. And the way to do it is to actually spend time doing it under low pressure. We have a tendency to get on the water to paddle and trade, particularly preparing for an event, and the first thing we do is go straight for make every session sort of outcomes from a performance base as opposed to spending time working on technique. Compare it to any other sport, basketball players don't go, pro basketball players don't go play 5 hours of basketball every day. They're doing drills, which is covering shoots. I don't know, they play basketball, but I'm pretty sure they don't play basketball for 5 hours a day. So breaking away from making every paddle just about going as far or as fast as possible is also pretty important. So what I've ended up doing over the years is kind of setting aside like one session a week where all I do is a technique. So if it's only a 30-minute session where heart rate stays right down, but you're just working on technique, seems to make a big difference. If you don't have the luxury of being able to do more than sort of 3 or 4 sessions in say a week where you can't actually dedicate a full session to doing these things, another way to do it is to spend like the first 10 minutes just focusing on drills, and then the last 15 minutes as well. So that, we can talk about that a bit more later when we cover the trading side of things. But we'll start with the boat setup. So it's important that the foot plate is at the right length. What that means is that you do also moves as part of the stroke. Your setup facilitates the rotation rather than driving. You don't want to be actively pushing to twist your body. But you want to, you'll find that if your setup is correct, your stroke structure is correct, your body will actually start rotating. That will facilitate that nice, so you don't feel like you're having to try and ride that twist. That of course is also talk about we'll run through the body and look at how you got it set up now, and we'll have a look at it. Then throughout the session we'll have an opportunity to go back and adjust it. The key thing that we look at is what I refer to as strong position. So the whole idea here, it was a podcast that I heard from a guy who's a strength trainer but has a history in paddle sports. And when he spoke about it, he said ultimately his goal as a trainer is to have his athletes look the same at the finish of a race, and he was referring to Molokai, which is a 4-hour race, 30 times. Look the same at the finish of the race as what they do when they start. So if you're overworking the wrong muscle groups throughout the paddle or throughout the race or whatever, you're going to end up collapsing, technique is going to fall apart, and you're going to kind of do whatever you can to get to the finish. So when we look at setting up what I'm going to refer to as the strong position, the whole idea here is to try and engage and activate the right muscle groups in a way that is the most efficient use of energy. And this all ties back to the 4 steps of the stroke. So the stroke is made up of 4 steps. The first is the catch, then it's the power phase, then it's the exit, and then it's the recovery. And what we do, just like any other sport or any other sport athletic movement, it's all about sequencing. So setting up that first position is critical to making sure that the rest of the stroke follows through in the correct sequence. So often what happens is we'll get in the boat and we'll try and sort of put too much power in too early, or rush the catch. So we're kind of putting before we've actually got purchase on the water, so you're kind of wasting energy before you've gained any movement. So by looking at the strong position and setting up the catch correctly, the rest of it kind of falls into place. What I like to do here is kind of encourage you to find triggers, which will then, it will indicate whether you're doing it right or not. And when I say doing it right, it's right for you as opposed to right for me. So what's right for me is not necessarily going to be right for everyone else. So when we talk about the strong position, this is a drill that you can do anywhere. In fact, I encourage you to do it, especially if you do gym routines or home workouts or anything like that, is to go and stand in front of a mirror and do this from time to time. So when we look at the paddle stroke, I'm going to pick it up for a second now, then I'm going to drop it and we're going to do it without the paddle at all. But effectively, this is what we're looking at. So this position, which changes radically between people, from being like that, or like this, or like that. But effectively, what we're wanting to do here for this drill is this position, which we're going to refer to as the strong position. We look at a few key things, and a couple of things that you've got to accept. So the first is that in this case, so this I'm going to refer to as my weak side paddle. So left hand in the water. And what you might find when we do this drill is that you actually, what you consider to be your weak side, from a structural point of view, is actually your strong side. You obviously we've got a side that we favor from, whether it be left or right. And often what I find with this lesson is that everybody tells me that this is their strong side because it's their right hand up here, but it actually ends up being the left side up. is stronger. So in terms of the strong position, what we look at is that in terms of the front hand, so the hand that's got the blade in the water, will be just below your shoulder, and your right hand, your elbow will be just below your shoulder. So this changes depending on your body type. So for shorter guys, it's often easier for them to be slightly above, which is acceptable, but what we want to avoid is doing this, having the paddle up there. For taller guys with longer arms, a little bit lower is pretty typical, and this is all going to be coming down to what feels strong and manageable for yourself. So strong position. So when we do this drill, what I suggest you do is starting with your top hand. So if you're standing square, your shoulder, so your elbow, should be in line with your shoulder as far as possible. You don't want it too far out, and you obviously don't want it too far in. So if this is square, we're good. Often what we hear is that your fist should be at eye height, right? I find that it doesn't make sense to focus here when your primary, the lower your center of gravity, the better. And it's easier to control your elbow in this case than it is to control your hand. This is closer, and it's a lot easier from a peripheral vision point of view to just keep an eye on what's going on here than what's going on here. This part here is going to change based on the length of your arms and the length of your paddle, what the wind's doing and what the water's doing. So if we focus just on the elbow, and the big thing here is opening up the chest so that it is square to your elbow is square to your chest. So this is important but not critical, but this is pretty important, and probably more important than what that actual height is, in terms of small margins. So when we do this drill, elbows up, and then left hand is again just below our elbow and squared off. So what we've got here is a 90-degree angle between the hand and elbow. If we accept that in this position, when you're taking the stroke, this hand here should be relaxed. All it is doing is facilitating and holding onto the paddle, whereas the grip on the bottom hand is going to be the one that's kind of controlling what's going on. So for this drill, what we do is we stand like that, and to help activate, what we want to do here is lock up this system. So once the paddle's in the water, and we'll go through it with the paddle and go through the actual stroke. But what we're wanting to do here is hold this position for as long a period of the stroke as possible. Okay, so while we're doing it on land and we're not moving, it feels like a long time, but it literally is split seconds. But if this falls apart, so when I say it falls apart, I mean you break this elbow or push this hand forward before you reach the right part of the stroke, you're losing an energy. So when I do this drill, what I do is hands up here, and I actually squeeze those fingers together, like flat like that. And same with this. So automatically now, I can feel the sort of tension and the locking up from my hand through my shoulder to my chest, and then it carries on through to the other side. So what this does is by keeping my fingers together like this, and the harder you squeeze, the more you feel the rest of your torso kind of locking up, the easier it is to maintain that structure while you rotate. So what we do is we stand in front of a mirror, and you just go from, so obviously like it's difficult here because you can't see yourselves, but what you're wanting to do is this angle stays the same, and our hand heights stay the same. And you look in front of the mirror and you just rotate so that the plane of that hand goes from being like that to being basically at 90 degrees to what it was. So we're taking this 90-degree structure, and without opening up that structure, rotate across like that. So straight away I can see what's happening is that it's going like this.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? It's going like this. So if I'm not rotating, it's going like that, which is not what we're going to do. Obviously when you're holding a paddle, it's going to be slightly easier because your hands are at a fixed point, but that's not helping to train your body to keep that structure. So if you do it with the paddle, it's obviously a lot easier, but then you're relying on your hands and the power of your hands to keep that structure together as opposed to your whole body. So I'll stand in the mirror and I'll go like that, and I'll do the same side sort of 20 times. Just keep going like that. If you do that, and you can over rotate it as well, but it's unnecessary. The whole idea here is just to keep, you have a fixed point where you, so if you find it, line it up with a tree or whatever, you can find like a reference point. And then you flip it over to the other side. The first time you do it, you'll feel like a robot. But same thing. Start, if it means starting on one side, one hand first, get that into the right position, then extend your other hand, and just go like that. So that's a drill that I find helps a lot. While you're standing here doing it, you should feel your core lock up. So again, what we want to do is try and keep that position as long as possible in the stroke. So when it comes to setting it up relative to the paddle, so obviously now you don't have the luxury of being able to hold the fingers flat. But now once the paddle's set up, that's all there. So when we look at paddle setup itself, what I did was, because again when I started paddling, it was like you got to go 260, 60 degrees, off you go. And it was actually after seeing pictures of myself at a race, and I looked at it, like I saw a picture of it, and this is not even that long ago, and I looked at it like it just doesn't look right. Like there's something going on with this left hand, like it explains so many things. Like you're getting forearm pump on one side and tennis elbow on the other side, like no matter how much I warmed up, and so then I looked at it and I kind of broke it down a bit, and I kind of narrowed it down to the paddle angle being wrong for me. You know, the theory that I was taught with initially was, you know, the weight that the boat throws determines the angle that you should be putting the paddle. It's like, I mean, if you think about it, it's so completely absurd because the different width of the boat, I mean, the boat width changes the direction of the wake. And you know, the theory was that you must pull the paddle across like that. And in order to do that, and that's why the paddle is angled the way it is. So I went through a phase as a teenager where young guy, where that's what you focus on. Pull the paddle away like that. And then having done a bit more research, kind of investigating this dodgy forearm story, what I actually did is I loosened the clamp on my paddle, and I just paddled easy. And then did it like a couple of times, I looked down and the angle was completely different to what I started off with, and then I locked the paddle. So if you accept that when we take a stroke, we're not pulling the paddle, we're placing the paddle and pushing down rather than pulling it off. So the easiest way to refer it is to the same as like skiing, right? You place it's called a pole, right? So you place the pole there, the pole doesn't move, you pull yourself past the pole, right? Yeah.
How much consciously are you pushing down on the paddle? Are you really through your top arm pushing?
Absolutely.
That's what everybody's telling me, that you push.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
So that pressure transfers from the top hand. So this is why that structure is so important. So the pressure is transferred from your right shoulder, when you're taking a stroke on the left side, through your body, you're locked in place with your foot blade onto that blade. So and we'll do a drill in the water where it'll really be emphasized, and you'll be able to play around with it and see what happens if you kind of let go of that structure, or try and pull versus pushing down. So in terms of the paddle setup, the idea here is that the surface of the blade, and this is regardless of the size of the blade, is that you kind of need to the paddle needs to go straight onto the water like that. You don't want to be putting the paddle down like that. So like you often see guys take a stroke like this, which is quite high up. So I say this hand being too high means that the blade goes like that, which is fine if you're going to accept that you're pulling the paddle, but we want to try and move away from that, and accept that we want to try and get as much purchase on the water by pushing down as possible. Yeah.
So how do you change it from what you just said?
Yeah.
Because it's 60 because that's where somebody put me when I started.
Yeah.
And
So
boy, I tried going to zero feather. I almost fell out of the boat.
yeah.
You can't.
Yeah.
Kidding.
So have you considered that it might be somewhere in between?
Right. So how do you?
Yeah.
So loosening it up,
Yeah.
and then it's going to end up where it should
Yeah.
theoretically.
Yeah. So what you would do there is loosen it up,
Yeah.
and then focus on doing one or two things which are critical to the stroke, and it will by default.
It'll maneuver itself to the
Yeah.
position it wants to be.
Yeah, and then you lock it up, and then you. I mean, it's not to say that that's done and dusted. You know, you still may need to play around with it and tinker with it to get it 100% correct, but it's a lot more accurate than doing what somebody else has told you to do. Yeah.
Is it generally around 40 for a lot of people?
It's getting lower and lower, yeah. So for me, it's between 40 and 45 is what can happen. So that's the other thing. So it changes relative to the length of the paddle, right?
That was my next question.
Yeah.
This is my 7th year paddling.
Yeah.
I've had somebody, Joe Shaw, a local guy, start me.
Yeah.
Then I had Sean Rice,
Yeah.
Kenny Rice here, paddled with him.
Yeah.
They put me out to 212.
Yeah.
Haley Nixon and Linton Holt
Yeah.
had me go to 208, 207.
Yeah.
I started paddling 206 this year.
Yeah.
My shoulder started bothering.
Yeah.
And I noticed with some of my drills, I've gone back out to 210 and I can go faster
Yeah.
with a longer paddle. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know what the hell it is.
And this is something that I picked up. So, sort of in COVID, we all started riding bikes. We weren't riding paddle, and I found that. So like now, so before I either paddled or I ran, and like a bit of gym work in between. But the riding kind of introduced a whole different scope of things, and I find that my leg length changes throughout the year, depending on how much riding and how much running I'm doing. Because obviously the muscles are growing, tendons are growing. You know, if you're kind of overdoing it, I end up having a shorter leg length because hamstrings are kind of shortening. And it's the same thing with the paddle, right? Like more time you spend in the quads, muscles are changing, your mobility and your flexibility is changing all the time. So to be completely regimented about it is not doing yourself any favors. That's why understanding and finding out what feels good, feels right, and feels efficient is so important. Because you can jump on. I mean, I could jump on here now, and automatically so I haven't paddled with water that for ages. We are coming out of winter. It's like shallow water. It's always windy. It's dark. Like all these little things make a big difference. And I find that half a centimeter change and 2 degree change in the angle makes a difference to the way it feels. So it's something that you have to like constantly challenge. And that's, I mean, for me, I suppose, and it'll be the same for most people that are not pros, like, is that this stuff you should be stimulated to try and play around with different setups until you feel right. And if it feels right today, it feels wrong tomorrow, then do what feels right tomorrow.
Well, I was taking those as being more absolutes. I didn't think that I never thought of loosening it up.
Yeah, yeah. And like I said, it changes. So I've got, I mean, my angle changes, and sometimes I'll put it back halfway through a paddle. I'll go back to what felt better yesterday. But yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, what we do is we start off. So we're going to do a drill where so basically we're paddling on one side, and the idea there is to work on setting up that structure, getting the paddle angle right, and reinforcing the stroke, and more importantly, and I'm not the first person to say this, but being able to brace correctly on both sides is possibly the most important thing that you can do, in the water. Whether it's out in the middle of the lake here or in the ocean somewhere, if you're not stable in the boat, you're not safe. And being able to brace correctly is paramount to that. So the drill that we do is designed to help with setup, but then also to reinforce that brace stroke. So in terms of the paddle, so we typically always start setting up on weak side just because it feels comfortable to have the paddle up. What we really want to do is that, remember that our right hand is the controlling hand. Is anybody left feather here? Is everyone right feather? Okay, so our right hand is the controlling hand here, and the paddle relaxes on your left side. So it spins on your left side. So the way to do this in terms of your setup question is that you start off on the right hand side. So like when we do this drill, it's pretty easy because you're only going to be working on the right hand side to start off with. But the paddle needs to go into the water. The plane of the paddle should be sort of parallel to the edge of the surface. The edge of the paddle should be perpendicular to the edge of the boat. So we want to be there, and we want to be. So the difference is that obviously you can't be there because what's going to happen here is that you're going to be away from the boat. You want to be there because then when you push down, the paddle goes down, chances are to throw your body. When we do the drill, you'll see that's what makes this look. So you'll often see as well, like especially like A1 racing, the catch phase looks super aggressive. For me, a good catch is one that just happens quietly, almost don't even know that it's happened. So when I'm paddling, like especially you paddle a catch like this, where it's quiet, and you can hear every paddle stroke, you hear the paddle going into the water. If you've made a good catch, you haven't heard it. So the setup starts with the edge of the blade just on the edge of the top of the water. So it's not a powerful, aggressive motion. It's setting up, and it's just as soon as the edge of the blade touches the water, that's when you start applying power. And that power, again, is pushing down through the top hand, through the bottom hand. We're not trying to pull, we're just facilitating the power going down. So again, if we want to keep that position for as long as possible, right? What needs to happen is the paddle needs to go out wide, right? Because if we try and keep it close to the boat, two things are going to happen. The first is that your bottom hand is going to bend, and your top hand is going to extend. So you're going to end up going like this. As soon as you've done that, you've lost all power. Okay? So in order to facilitate keeping that position, you've got to let it go out wide. Okay? So this is why when we do that drill in the mirror, the idea is that you rotate like that. Because it doesn't matter, there's no such thing as too wide when it comes to this. Okay, so it can go out as wide as what your body and your paddle would allow. So you're going to go out to the side like that. Okay, so the drill that we'll do, basically what we're going to do, sorry, before I go back, let's go to the setup on the left hand side. So if you're sitting in the water or on the grass here, which we'll do before we get in the water, the first thing that we'll do is everybody sits, your hands both over the edges, you sit in with your typical setup, okay? Then when everybody's happy, I'll come through and have a look. And then we're going to look at what your paddle looks like. If you put it in the correct position, right? So perpendicular and facing down. And then if you lock your hand on that side and you put the paddle on the other side, what does that look like? So I'll bet that for a lot of people, they won't have the left and the right looking the same. The left side will usually be twisted out like that if you're at 60 degrees, or like that if you're at less, right? So if it's a bilateral sport and you want to get the same result from left and right, start off with your right side, position of the paddle and the blade on the right side, swing it over to what is the natural position without bending your wrist on the right side.
Or you're not twisting it.
No. So if you have to twist your wrist, your right wrist, to get to the same position on the left side, so what we want to see here is neutral wrists on both sides, right? So what we don't want to see is, so I'll build when we did the extreme go 75 degrees, right? So there, my wrist like that. This is what was giving me forearm pump and tennis elbow and sore wrists and all that kind of thing. So if you have issues with forearm pump and wrist pain especially, that's the first thing to look at. So I mean, this is something you can also do like by standing in front of the fence like this. So like we'll stand here, I'll go like that, right? So I'm happy that that's my position. I'll go that side. Bang on 45. So for me that works, right?
Here.
Yeah.
I do that same thing.
Right? So I'm here. Person going here.
Right to it.
Squirrel. You're standing.
He was having to switch together.
60.
Loosen it.
Leave it loose.
Right, 100%.
30, 40.
So what's changing? What's the difference between the two? 'Cause you would think it's symmetric. So is it just you said not the wrist? So is it more in the hands, like the roll, or is it when you place it, it kind of enters a little bit different, but then it locks into your hand? It locks in because of the way it wants to grab the water and
So
even out.
So this is the thing, right? So you want to put it in the place that's the correct position for the blade.
Yeah.
That bottom blade. So what we do is subconsciously is move our wrist to get it there.
Right.
But you don't want, I mean, how many strokes to take a 10K, right? Like imagine doing this. So let's say you do a 60-minute 10K at 40 strokes a minute. Stand here and do this. Like, I mean, the fatigue is unreal. That's just on one side. So that's no external force or pressure. So figuring it out is, like I said, it's a process that takes a bit of time. But if you, this is what I say, like identifying triggers and key things to focus on rather than, I mean, like let's agree that there is so much information to go through to take 2 strokes that it's almost impossible to remember. So what I say is focus on one thing and then figure out how to get that part right. And for me, it's always been that position. the position of the paddle on the water. Once that's right, you can't do anything unless that is right. So your setup is something that obviously takes a bit of work, and then once that setup is correct, then you can start focusing on the next, kind of maintaining power throughout the stroke, or putting the blade up, rotating to set up for the next stroke. So the drill that we'll do is, we'll call it like a one-sided paddle drill. So we'll go, you'll choose which side to set up on, and that's the side that you'll start off with. And we're going to take 10 strokes at a time. As soon as you start doing more than 10, kind of start getting a bit tired. If you do any less than that, you don't actually give yourself a chance to figure things out. So I work on 10 strokes at a time. So we'll set up, we'll start off with your favourable side. I say favourable because you think it's your strong side, but usually from a structural point of view, it's actually your weak side. So we take a stroke, you allow the blade. So the idea here is that we're practicing this locking up your strong position. So you kind of want to facilitate the blade as far out as possible without breaking that structure. So for that strong position again is going to look slightly different from person to person. You want your bottom hand to be straight but not locked. You don't want to feel pressure on your elbow. And your top hand, while if you do it without a paddle, it's easy to keep it square like that. But in order for me to have my paddle there and my hand there, I need a paddle like 40 centimeter paddle, which is just obviously not paddle. So once you're in a paddle, once you're holding a paddle, that position is going to be slightly different. But what's important is that whatever that position is, stays locked up throughout the stroke. So when we do the drill, what we're going to do is take the stroke, keeping that position. All you do is slightly paddle along the top of the water, all the way through, and I encourage you to knock the boat. What that does is make sure that you're getting as far forward as possible. And by not lifting the paddle, it's encouraging you to place the paddle for the catch rather than just trying to catch it. So we drag it along, and the paddle's already on the surface of the water. All you're doing is trying to push it down. So we do 10 strokes on one side, then, like for today especially, take 2 or 3 strokes, regular strokes, to reset, and then start on the other side. 9 times out of 10, if you go straight from the one side, try to do the drill on the other side, you'll miss the water. It's a weird feeling. So as soon as you start coming around,
I mean, for this drill,
you start there, so but remember, elbow not so remember, like as if you take the paddle out of the hip, you'll off that first, then halfway out. But when we do it, you'll see, as soon as you start pulling, or allowing the paddle to come, as soon as you start pulling towards yourself, towards your blade, your whole body folds over and your center of balance goes from one side to the other. If you allow the paddle to drift out wide, your center of balance stays in the middle and you paddle in the right position that you need to brace. Bracing is there, it's not here. Like we have a tendency to say that again. Bracing is out there. It's like an outrigger. So no. So bracing on that side. Yeah.
brace that brace.
What is that? You don't want to be bracing here. Take a stroke. You want to be bracing here. So I encourage you to so we're training downward. Like to really try and emphasize out there. It's so much more stable than how much really one is. But we'll get like these things, when we're doing the drill, I'll spend a bit of time with everybody going through bit by bit. Are there any questions before we start setup?
On the extent. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
On the extension, do you lock your elbow, or do you keep a bend to it?
Yeah, you want to keep it slightly bent.
Okay.
Yeah. So locking it is just gonna, you don't gain anything, and it's just unnecessary tension. So it's you know, for some people again that degree of being locked is different, and that's going to vary depending on your body type and the size of your blade.
So I've never feathered. So when
Okay.
we get on the water, should I just like unlock it and see what happens?
Yeah. So I think we'll start off with the dry land.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we'll set up now. So what I'll ask you to do, just as a matter of interest, is to set up your paddle before you put your boat out, the way that you have been doing it, and then just apply that area of blade position and see what your left side looks like. And then you can choose to change it before we get on the water and see if there's a regulation there, or change it once we're on the water.
So you don't have your own swing.
You'll see when I get in the water. So, there are a couple of things here. In terms of length, if you find that your hands are constantly underwater every time you take a stroke, chances are your paddles are too short. If you find that you are when it's too long, you find that you can't get from one transition to the next. So you can't get from the left side to the right side in a comfortable sort of rhythmic pattern. It seems like there's too much going on. So that length you do need to play around. And again, it varies from person to person and blade size. Bigger blades you get away with a shorter shaft, the overall length is going to be the same. Then again, flat water is going to be longer. And then just one other thing before we start to set up is the position of the blade at the catch must always be as far forward as possible without sacrificing your reach. One thing we didn't touch on, which we'll do briefly before you start to set up, is the footboard setup and things like that. Another reason why it's so important is that we want to encourage pivoting at the hips rather than bending our backs to get reach going forward. So we want to keep our backs straight and our pelvis is tilted forward. So if you're standing still and you kind of push your butt out and lean forward like that, that's kind of how you want to be in the boat. So that you are encouraged to lean forward without having to bend your back to get forward. So that's one thing that is pretty evident as soon as you get in the boat, the setup. If your leg length is too long, you don't have enough purchase and enough pressure to facilitate that pelvic tilt. So you end up leaning back. If it's too short, you end up in a similar position where you might actually get forward.
A question about your shoulders. You're talking about the catch, trying to get as far forward as you can.
Yeah.
Are you kind of opening your shoulder socket up to kind of get reach, or are you kind of keeping everything in traction?
Yeah, so opening the shoulder up is relatively easy in a controlled setup. So, flat water or on land, it's easy to get that sensation.
Yeah.
But it's actually, like, in terms of the grand scheme of things, it's a bit of a weak point, right? So you need to be able to, first of all, you want to be able to do it time and time again. And if you're sacrificing stability to unlock your shoulder to get it there, you're gonna up taking a short catch or a missed catch going through. So my suggestion, I mean, I've never really like explored it any further than what I've done, but for me it makes sense that you don't want to be overextending anyway, and I think to open your shoulder you would be overextending. So I would say that keeping that position, if it's sustainable for you to open it up more like that, then it's worth exploring. But I can't imagine that being able to do it repetitively for an hour is possible without sacrificing something along the way.
Can you just ask a quick question?
Yep.
So sometimes I notice the technique when people are, rotating, that there's a little bit of a curvature.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's to help engage the core in the rotation. And is that appropriate, or is it better to be more open?
It's definitely better to be more open. So one of the things that we do when we look at the drill is that the direction of pressure and the direction of the force that we want to generate is, and this is where it gets miscommunicated, and it's probably what you see, is that we talk about pressure going from your top elbow to your bottom knee, right? So like in this case, it would be when you're sitting in the boat, the direction of pressure from your hand to your elbow should be down like that. But it's a direction of pressure, not a direction of movement. So we don't want to be pushing down like that to get there. It's more because my elbow and my knee are going to be at different heights relative to each other than what yours are. So the idea here is that pressure should be coming across and down, but without sacrificing structure.
So without crunching.
Yeah. So because again, doing that 2,400 times, I mean, you'd all be pretty rough, right? Cool. Should we start setup? So we've already started by telling us